books, Architectural Color in the Professional Practice, which stimulated her work in practice color strategies in architecture. She's co-author with Haus der Farbe, Zurich in Color, Beyond the Surface, Art in Architecture. So we're very happy to give a warm welcome from all across Canada to Fiona, who's in Edinburgh, Scotland. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm sorry, I can't seem to share my screen. We've been having a little bit problems, colleagues, with the test. So Robin's kindly agreed to share the screen, and I will just say next slide, Robin, when we go. So apologies for that slight hiccup, but let's see if it'll work this way, a slightly more old-fashioned way. So just when you're ready, that's great. Yeah. Many thanks to Robin Kingsborough, to Doreen Balabanov, and to all of you in the Canada Colour Research Council for the invitation today. Like many Scots, I have cousins in Canada, so at some point it'd be lovely to come out and meet them and you perhaps. I'd like to also thanks to Verena Schindler of the AIC Environmental Colour Design Study Group, I think which Robin was just mentioning, who suggested me for this talk today. So thanks to Verena. So my research for the last 15 years or so has focused on the use of colour in architectural design. And coming from architectural practice, my aim has always been to develop research that's useful to practice, and then also in teaching architecture students about colour at Edinburgh University, I seek to promote a more informed understanding of colour. And recently, I've been researching the role of painting as a tool for discussion and collaborative practice in colour design. I'd like to illustrate that today through my research with my partners Haus der Farbe in Zurich, and also through an ongoing collaboration with which is concentrated on introducing colour onto two large brutalist housing blocks in Edinburgh, where abstract paintings and collage have been used alongside conventional architectural digital design. So next slide, please. Okay, so architects and designers constantly use abstracted sketches, plans, diagrams, and models as a means to clarify conceptual thinking. The Museum of Scotland, I don't know how many of you have visited Edinburgh. If you have, you might well have visited this building. So the Museum of Scotland is a landmark contemporary building in Edinburgh, which tells the story of Scotland from prehistoric times to the present. The project was won in competition by architects Benson and Forsyth back in 1991. The essence of the project is captured on the left in this very small abstract sketch by the architects. The simplified drawing suggests a cradled roof garden where people will be held above the city streets, with a visual and symbolic link between the ancient volcanic rock of Arthur's Seat and the medieval castle. In this black and white image, the idea is stripped to its purest form and realised in the completed building. Next slide, please. Sometimes colour is used in architectural diagrams, often to add emphasis or as a means to differentiate one element from another. In this drawing from my own office, for example, colour is not intended to be representative of any proposed colour design, but it's used as a process of abstraction and reductive analysis. Next, please. Sometimes abstracted images will also show the intended colour design. Here, in a hand-drawn isometric study of a proposed alterations to the Icon Museum in Korcha, Albania, by architects Bowles-Wilson, watercolour paint is used to differentiate spatial volumetric sequences and also demonstrates the vital role of colour in the realised project, which you can see on the bottom right. Next, please. My chapter in this book, Visual Research Methods in Architecture, provided an opportunity to reflect on the role of painting in architectural design, which is the main thread of my current colour research. Next, please. The chapter considers different forms of painting that have informed my own research, such as here, this triptych painting, which is a form of index that I did back in 2009, actually, which effectively kick-started my research on colour, as I was documenting the colour that my architectural practice had used over a period of around 30 years. Next, please. And then collaged building portraits, and next. And abstract visualizations, which were developed along with Hausterfarbe in Zurich. Next, please. The work with Hausterfarbe has been very significant for me personally, and their ongoing research into the colour culture in Switzerland and beyond has resulted in a series of very beautiful and informative publications. So just if you don't know Hausterfarbe, do look them up. They're a really innovative and quite unique institution. So our book, Colour Strategies in Architecture, which was published in 2015, was also published in German and was developed by us in response to a perceived gap in the literature on colour in three-dimensional situations. The cross-disciplinary team included a colour designer, art and architectural historians, and myself as the only architect. Next. The hand-painted studies for the book formed then a touring exhibition, which was shown in 11 venues across Europe, here at the Architectural Association in London. Next, please. For our research project, we understood the need to observe on site rather than using material samples that don't give the full effect of a built surface in its context. We concluded that an experiential methodology is more appropriate in capturing architectural colour than any precise measurement. The process of mixing the colours themselves using acrylic paint gave time to think and observe. And here I had 3 wonderful student helpers in Edinburgh, and then we had simultaneous people working in Zurich and in Berlin on the book. Next, please. Through this deliberately analogue method, we hand-mixed around 350 colours to match swatches. These then formed the basis of the study of 6 architectural practices in Berlin, Zurich and Edinburgh from the 1920s to the present day. Only once all the colours had been documented, then the analysis of the strategic role of colour in the architecture began through a discursive process facilitated by the physical samples. Next, please. Hausterfarbe had previously established a methodology to construct collaged building portraits using hand-painted samples and detailed notes taken on site. Here, for example, is the reading room of Hans Scharoun's Berlin Staatsbibliothek. The observed palette is shown on the right. However, the image also embeds and conveys information about colour adjacencies, disposition, and a sense of relative proportions. Through these, the character of the space emerges akin to a human portrait. Next, please. The collaged abstracted visualizations were a new technique and proved very challenging. The intention was to try and construct a single image that would represent a strategic use of colour in a way that would be transferable. Here, for example, the strategy we called hushed tonalities, is based on the work of Scottish architects Riach and Hall, who are contemporary architects. They use a softly modulating palette, light and shadow, and the importance of inviting the landscape in as part of the colour composition. The significance of using abstract paintings was that they prompted discussion in the team and try and tease out the strategy. So not just what the colour is, but critically, what is the colour doing for the architecture? Next, please. I found Graham Sullivan's braided metaphor of visual arts research to be a really useful way to reflect on our process. In the diagram, starting on the left with data, in our case, the hand-painted samples from the built architectural projects, the information is unravelled as if a rope to specific threads of inquiry. Then, through expansive intersubjective discussion, new threads of knowledge emerge. Next, please. My colour design work is now grounded in this hand mixing of paint and this process developed by Hauster-Farbe, and on a strategic use of colour. The focus is always on how colour affects the architecture in an experiential way, rather than an expectation of precision. I also find that in teaching colour to architecture students, starting with a day of painting exercises is a highly effective and enjoyable way to establish some key principles as part of an intellectual framework, with time to observe and discuss. I thought you might enjoy seeing a few examples of student work at this point. Next, please. Students on my On Colour in Architecture course typically spend a day and a half a week for 11 weeks, with the first 3 weeks working together in small groups. The day spent painting is focused on subtractive mixing, adjusting hue with a contrasting colour, adjusting values in tints and shades, and adjusting chroma gradually by adding grey. They then have to try and mix colours of 3 random objects using the knowledge that they have just gained. While painting then, over the course of a day together, the language of colour is shifted to a more precise terms. Next, please. The next week, they use small models to explore figure and ground relationships and spatial studies, which then leads into conversations on the effect of saturation and tone, light and shadow. Next, please. Establishing an understanding that all colour is light is often a turning point for the students, and they explore additive mixing and reflected indirect colour through free experimentation with models. Next, please. Once an intellectual framework is established, each student develops a project on a colour palette and theme derived from a secondary source. Abstracted painting and digital collages are encouraged as a means to conceptualise and communicate their findings. Next, please. And again. Thank you. Sorry, if you go back, well, that's all right, it doesn't matter. Yes, they were reflected in an array of different materials. So she was interested in the colour and then how it was affected by reflecting in different surfaces. And then on the right, she made a hand painting which captures these subtle shifts in colour between the actual colour and the reflection. Thank you, Robin. Next. This student was interested in how people might associate their experience of flavours of food with colour. Drawing on Patrick Syme's 19th century book on colour associations in animal, mineral and vegetable sources, he asked a group of participants to paint the colour they associated with various ingredients and flavours, before then making a digital collage on the right, using recipes from Mrs. Beeton's 19th century cookbook. Here we have the derived colour palette for artichoke soup. Next, please. And here the palette for thick gingerbread. These images also drew on the building portraits in our Colour Strategies in Architecture book, considering how colour can define character and then could be applicable to spatial settings. Next, please. Another student started with an interest in colour composition derived from the asymmetry in Japanese flower arranging. Starting by documenting a series of garden spaces, her palette gradually emerged, and the project title became What Grows Together, Goes Together. Next, please. She tested compositions of hue, value, and saturation through some studies based on Joseph Albers' square paintings, and then finally on the right, how the palette might be used in an abstracted architectural space with a geometry derived from the Japanese flower arranging. Having taught this course now for around 10 years, it's clear to me that architecture students are really keen to develop a better understanding of colour. My emphasis is always on immersive, self-directed and experiential learning. So time will tell whether they have the confidence to use colour in their future architectural projects. Next, please. The act of painting itself seems significant in developing a confidence with colour. For example, here Paul Klee and his deep understanding and interest developed through experimentation and observation. While the British artist Patrick Heron from the 1970s has described painting's role in civilization as, quote, a laboratory for the disinterested exploration of visual appearances, an exploration carried out uninhibited by any practical demands whatsoever, unquote. Experiential learning through an immersion in colour and time to make art and work without specific purpose gives the artist more leeway than is generally afforded to an architect. Next, please. My book, Colour Beyond the Surface, Art and Architecture, which was published in 2022, explores these different knowledges that artists develop in relation to colour. Also, collaborative practices between artists and architects, and the role of colour in spatial settings from paintings which are embedded within the architecture. Next, please. The book was also triggered by a series of wall paintings which I painted myself with the help of architecture students at the Royal Edinburgh Mental Health Hospital between 2017 and 19, which I think of as somewhere between art and architecture. The proximity of the work and critically time to observe and reflect heightened my awareness of the spatial effects and also the reaction of people as the painting emerged. Architects are rarely afforded time to think this way. Next, please. Some architects do also paint, either adjacent or parallel to practice, and sometimes as a form of research method, but not necessarily directly about colour. For the 19th century architect Carl Friedrich Schinkel, however, painting seems to have informed his use of colour in his architecture. Next, please. He used both surface colour and tinted light in projects, such as here at the Schloss Charlottenhof in Potsdam from 1825, and in the nearby bathhouse. His travels to the ruins of Pompeii were clearly a formative experience in the use of colour, experienced both in darkness and in light. Next, please. Contemporary architect Peter Wilson of Balls Wilson Architects has painted since childhood, and he said this was a form of escape from parental demands to do sporting activities. Drawing and painting remains central to his architectural practice. Some paintings he thinks of as a form of private reverie, conversations with himself. Next, please. But they've also honed his understanding of colour. Quote, "Over the years, I've been training my eye to dwell on nuances of transition, when a tone slips into penumbra or where a wall has faded or been stained. Computer gradations make a mockery of this subtle art." Next, please. It's interesting to note that the practice's built architecture is unthinkable without colour. Next, please. Experimenting through painting can also be considered as material research. For example, Eileen Gray, an architect and designer from the early 20th century, used her intensely private painting practice to develop complex and ambiguous layered artwork, also applying her extensive understanding of varnishes. She not only mastered colour, but also understood the active play of light, sheen, glossy and matte surfaces, and the effect of texture. Next, please. I find it's always important to establish some principles on how we experience colour as a dynamic, metaphysical phenomenon, particularly in the environment in 3D architectural settings. Once grasped that colour is entirely light dependent, we can start to understand why it feels different geographically. Here, the soft Scottish light penetrates deep into spaces almost horizontally at times, lighting vertical surfaces. I'm sure it must be similar in northern parts of Canada. I was looking at our relative latitudes the other day there just to check that, so I think we're about halfway up Canada. Next, please. Colour in the environment, therefore, is also constantly changing in appearance. The colour temperature of daylight varies across the day and with orientation and time of year. This study by a student of mine captures the shift in colour appearance of surfaces over the course of a day. We might not notice these subtle shifts as our minds think of colour as constant rather than elastic. Developing colour proposals for the external architectural surfaces, therefore, must take account of this variation. Which takes me to another example, and the final one, which is the development of a colour strategy for a large architectural project in collaboration with the architects. Next, please. I was approached by the practice Collective Architecture in 2023, when they first started to explore the potential for integrating colour into the proposals for a major energy retrofit of 2 brutalist housing projects in Edinburgh. The buildings, designed by Allison and Hutchison and partners, were completed between 1963 and 67. Looking north here to the River Forth from Calton Hill in Edinburgh, the block on the left is Cable's Wynd House, well known for its iconic curving form, a nickname of the Banana Flats, with the large slab facade of Links View House to the right. Next, please. The priority for the project is to make these buildings energy efficient through new heating and ventilation strategies and installation as part of a sensitive rehabilitation. Fundamentally, if these buildings are to have longevity and can continue to be relevant and useful to society, they will need to be cared for and to evolve. Whilst the 2 blocks are siblings, they are experienced very differently. The large curving mass here of Cable's Wynd House is glimpsed at acute angle, tucking behind existing tenements. Next. While Links View House is more experienced in elevation or from below as a slab. In retrofitting projects, colour may be used to manipulate as an immediate signifier of investment and renewal. But here, when the projects are listed for their architectural significance, retrofitting can be extremely complex and needs a sensitive approach. Next, please. Thank you. At Cable's Wind, the first question was why add colour? What could colour do for the architecture and for the community? The rhythms of the concrete structure and the panel system are the most significant part of the architecture and the reason for their high grade A heritage status. The intention is to line all the surfaces of the balconies in insulated render. Pragmatically, therefore, the new surfaces will require decisions on colour. To paint something white is a conscious colour decision and also a constructed narrative. Next, please. And as we know, modernism was never white, as is often portrayed. The obvious example on the right being Le Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation. I would recommend Mark Wigley's book, White Walls, Designer Dresses, which considers this theme in detail. Next, please. My starting point was to document the colour palette in the surrounding area, which is predominantly sandstones and some traditional render. Next, please. The initial palette that developed on the right was a combination then of ochres, terracottas, olive greens, and a few sharper colours. Making a series of abstract paintings, I tested how these colours would sit together and established the need for more tonal contrast. Next, please. The balconies on both buildings express their occupation with washing lines and some painted recesses in an ad hoc manner. Both the tangible and the intangible, the embodied energy and the embodied community, contribute to a sense of place and are the basis for the retention of these buildings. Next, please. I then made a larger abstract painting, originally for myself, which I called The Lives Within, which was a way to think about and celebrate the diverse lives of people who have lived, are living, and will live in these blocks. The painting is an abstraction, neither one building nor the other, but tries to understand the subtle rhythms of the balconies. Next, please. Collective architecture are known for their community consultation embedded in the design development, making frequent visits to gain trust and try to involve the residents. Improving the lives of the residents who can feel unseen and unheard is central to the project. The access galleries, which you can see on the right, are presently monotonous and understimulating. Colour will also be introduced to these spaces to enhance the everyday lives and differentiate between the floors. Next, please. So in developing a colour strategy for this project, I turned to the work of a Scottish textile designer, Bernard Klein, from the mid-1960s and 70s. I was interested firstly in the way he used abstracted paintings of the landscapes around his home to develop colour palettes. Next, please. And then secondly, the way in which the yarn, you can see some of the original balls of wool from the 1960s on the left, the yarn was deliberately invited an element of randomness, both in colour and in texture, so some thick and some thin, which is then woven into the final fabric. For us, it seemed important to avoid making a formal pattern with the colour, which might undermine the existing form. Instead, the colourist strategy that emerged has embedded rhythms, but also the occasional fleck of discord. On the right-hand side is a piece of 1960s tweed fabric by Klein, but then recoloured digitally with the palette that we were proposing. Next, please. With a view to develop a further series of paintings, this time hand-painted laser-cut collages, were developed to convey the proposed colour strategy, which I call warp and weft. This diptych collage also explored a potential difference looking to the north and to the south, where more colour on the north sides would catch the sun. The colour appears to thread along and down the facades, apparently appearing and disappearing, as in a woven fabric. Next, please. With a view to developing an interactive version to aid discussion, we then tested a collage kit with thousands of tiny pieces. The balcony facade was abstracted to fold out the soffits, that's the underside of the balconies, and the balcony sides, which makes the colour more apparent than it will be in reality, but helped with composition. My students on the right were the first to experiment with the facade design using the conceptual warp and weft strategy to guide their discussions. Next, please. We also invited the Cableswind and Linksview residents to take part in a painting workshop using pre-mixed colours. Bottom on the left there, we put them in ice cube trays. They were quite effective. So that they kind of got used to the palette through making paintings themselves. And then they were referring to my own abstract paintings. It was actually really interesting to listen into the discussions about the colours, and the process of painting and using the collage kit enabled a freer discussion than might have been the case in a formal presentation. The client also joined in along with the architects. The consultation prompted a few adjustments to the palette, but the tenants were generally very supportive of introducing colour. Next, please. Over the course of 2024, many versions of the facade were explored, and the kit allowed us to arrange and rearrange. Next, please. A colour strategy guided these discussions as we sought to establish some principles for the application and composition rather than strict rules. Next, please. It's been interesting to consider how these paintings complement digital tools, noting somehow that being able to hold on to painted pieces gives a very different experience to a digital composition, where colour on one screen can appear radically different from the next. If there are colour scientists amongst you, that might feel strange, but it's always the case that in an architectural office, they will rarely have properly calibrated screens. On the left, then, is a study of just 5 bays of the long facade of Cableswind House. From these, we developed an idea that the colour might also be used to hint at the plan and section, which is not currently apparent, such as vertical lines of colour to suggest the 3-storey ordering of the building section, and then taking the colour across, where through flats have a double balcony. Alongside the collages, the architects also tested on a physical model to begin to understand the effect of light and shadow, at the same time working with conventional digital drawings. Next, please. In comparison with the balcony elevations, the west elevation of Cableswind House and the north of Linksview House present themselves as very anonymous, homogeneous walls with very little tonal contrast. This is just half of the length of the block. There's another half of it as it bends round the corner. Next, please. The relative flatness of this facade suggested an approach that drew on textiles. This time, the tapestries of Annie Albers here I was exploring some studies to see if we could make the colour move along and down the facade. However, this was felt to be one step too far for the heritage authorities. The horizontal and planar arrangement of these facades seems important in contrast to the animated balconies on the other side. A simplified tonal concept then began to emerge, with darker windows to increase the contrast. And this has evolved further through digital studies by the architects. Next, please. The handmade collage, excuse me, I'll drink water. The handmade collage studies were then digitally extended. So the handmade was 5 bays, and then this is digitally to the full length of the building. But I like the way they still retain something of the imprecision and depth of the shadow of the physical collage. For the long unbent elevations then of Cable's Wine, a secondary rhythm began to emerge, almost akin to a repeated width of cloth. The collages then informed the next stage, where collective architecture shifted into CAD models and coded diagrams, such as at the bottom of the page here. Next, please. A vital step in the process is testing on site with physical panels of the proposed colours, seeing how different they appear on the north and south sides and on the soffits, making further adjustments. This is an ongoing process, and we hope to test with larger samples to finalise the palette before construction begins. Next, please. Further discussions on the colour palette from within the office resulted in a slightly lighter neutral base colour and sought to intensify some of the colours. They also introduced a bluish colour. What's clear, however, is the importance of the colour strategy. On the left is a digital diagram by the architects, which shows how they understood the strategy and how they were applying it in the composition. So although the palette is subject to multiple iterations and translations, the warp and weft colour strategy that was established using abstract collages has guided the colour design for the project. So in conclusion, maintaining a level of abstraction using physical paintings seems to have been useful for the architects. The collaged images themselves, and even digitally extended, carry imperfections and brush marks that seem to soften the character of the image. The abstraction effectively established the principles, and paintings proved to be an effective method of communicating the idea and the essence of the idea to very, very different audiences. Next, please. Here is a final image, this time a digital visualization produced by the architects as part of the planning application. I'm delighted to say that the project received both listed building consent and planning permission last summer, and work on this very exciting project will hopefully start later this year. Next, please. The project has been published as an academic article in a special edition of this journal, Area Journal, which is available open access. Next, please. Finally, my colour design for architecture website pulls together my applied research in colour design, which some of you might be interested in. Next, please. Happy International Colour Day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Fantastic.
And thank you, Robin, for your patience and changing the slides.
Beautiful, beautiful images. Fantastic work. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very happy to take any questions or comments in the chat. I have a question just to start. I mean, you mentioned it briefly, but I'm just wondering because you've taught this course for a while, can you see any implications of it down the road for your students, maybe some of the early ones who took the course?
Yeah, I really hope so. Some of the students are now up in the masters and the PhD in the program, but yeah, I don't know if anyone else is in the field of architecture, but it's so discouraged, even by colleagues. It's quite it does take quite a lot of courage, and yes, I think maybe in the next few years they will be out. Obviously, architecture is a long course, so it depends on where they go in the world. But they certainly really enjoy the course, and I think actually color in architecture is beginning to emerge. I think again, we're seeing quite a lot of young practices starting to use color, and so I'm hoping that that confidence will grow in the kind of next generation of students.
Thank you. Yeah, Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. That was wonderful. Very, very interesting, beautiful work. You mentioned fairly early in the talk that you had a mass of people going out and collecting samples of color in different architectural practices or works,
Mm.
buildings. And I was wondering, were those color samples collected from plans or from the living building? And I asked because I was in Berlin this time last year, having never been there. Um,
Yeah.
and when I first arrived, it was January. It was very dark, very gray. My first impression of the city was how exceptionally monochrome, sort of mid-tone grayish it was. And then I gradually began to see that it wasn't at all. It's got these
Mm-hmm.
very delicate pastel tint. And it struck me that that was a color that worked extremely well in that,
Mm-hmm.
Northern European inland light,
Mm.
sort of vibrant, intense color you might see in Mexico City might
Mm.
not work in Berlin, but these very delicate tints did. So I was wondering, um, when you were collecting your color samples, are they living, as it were, the way color lives in variable light, or were they
Yes, yes. And this is very much the technique from Hauser Farbe. So and I suppose a number of other people are using this method. So basically, you are observing, and the skill is really you need kind of to train the eye to observe, and it's usually best to do that with two people, so that you're standing at some at a distance, maybe a couple of meters from the building, and holding up swatches and kind of making a judgment as to what you're seeing. And obviously, if something's in shadow, you have to hold the swatch in the shadow as well. And if something is on the underside, then you have to hold the swatch in that same orientation so that you're getting the effect of the shadow. So then you make a judgment by eye on what you're seeing, and then the next bit, which is also by eye, is then we have a big Excel spreadsheet. So you're also noting where the colors are, what the surface is. Is it smooth? Is it flat? Is it glossy? Is it shiny? Is it slightly different from the nearest match sample? And then when you go back into the studio, you're hand mixing the color to match that judgment that you made on site. It's really important that it is the full building, because for instance, the architects of the practice of the project in Edinburgh gave me a big box of bricks and things. But if you see a single brick, it's not the same as seeing it, as you say, in the context of a built building. Yeah. And the projects in Berlin that we were looking at were actually all interiors. So the Hans Schalun's Staatsbibliothek, but also the Philharmonie, which is both these projects from the 1970s. And then the other architect was the architect of the wild 1970s Berlin underground, which is oranges and reds and a most astonishingly vibrant palette, which we called immersive pop. Because it's really, really like pop art. It's very vibrant. Sadly, some of those stations have been lost, and they've been redecorating them in a very bland, color scheme. But yeah, if you there's certain lines, if you're in Berlin, are really intense.
Great, thank you. Udo, I see you put a question in the chat. Do you want to just unmute and ask your question?
So thank you for your talk. It was excellent. I'm working in that field with architects quite a bit, and I find it very hard to convince architects, typically dressed in black, as you know, to use color on or in buildings. So it's always a struggle, and I I notice that I'm successful with long-term relationship architects where they trust you and
Yes.
you can do more than in a new relationship. But there is this inherent hesitance to use colors. They much more prefer to use colors through materials. So
Yes.
my question to you is how do you manage to convince them to go this route, which is fascinating?
Thank you very much, Udo. Now, I actually think it's a problem with education because many years ago when I started researching, I actually I had a research grant and we looked at who was teaching colour in architecture schools. And in the UK, there's only myself. So we have like 70 architecture schools. There's only my colour course in one. And then Anthony Malinowski, who is a Polish artist who teaches at the Architectural Association in London. So only two. So most of the architects practicing today have no colour education. I mean, it's just, I think Dresden is very good. I don't know where you are. Dresden has a good colour course. And so that Ralph Weber is there teaching. But yes, in answer to your question, I guess what was great was the architects approached me because I think particularly these brutalist housing blocks they are very neglected. The people are very fed up because, they so need of being repaired, and they are sadly associated with a lot of social issues. And so I think the architects were kind of from an early conception was thinking that something has to shift in the perception, in the social perception of these buildings, which are quite stigmatized. But what we didn't expect was we thought that the heritage bodies would be very anti the colour. But we took a really long time, maybe 2 years, just gradually working on that. And what was amazing was the painting process, I think, and the idea of the textiles people could latch onto. And so, we got planning permission, which was great. So, but you're right. I think it's my colleagues. Yes, it's always colour from materials rather than applied colour. But I think they still make colour decisions. It's just that they're making them in quite an arbitrary way, and at the end, they're not developing them with the design, which is really the Colour Strategies book, which you might be interested. It's Farb Strategy in der Architektur. It's also in German. Let me show you this one. So this is also published in German. which is still available. I think the English ones on Amazon are not available, but I have lots of copies if anyone wants to get in touch. But yeah, it's Schreiber Verlag, and that is a really, it's a very beautiful Swiss publication, I have to say. It sort of folds out, and yeah.
Great.
Great. Yeah, you can see one of Udo's paintings behind him too. So this, yeah, really interesting. Great to see your paintings too. Very. I think the problem of you know, lack of color in education across the board is just, you know, endemic around the world, not just in architecture, but other arts programs and in other programs as well. So yeah, I'm with the Color Literacy Project, and we're kind of trying to revitalize and invigorate color and color education. So I think I will definitely follow up with you about that going forward. But yeah, very happy to have you join us on International Color Day. And yeah, if you guys want to just turn your cameras on and wave hello, and thank you again once to Fiona. And very, very fascinating. The visuals were just stunning and very compelling that, you know, you can take this way of working with color and make it so effective and so evocative. And I'm sure you inspire many students to take this practice forward. So, yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's just getting chillier here in Scotland, so I don't know. Someday I would like to make it out to Canada. My father was actually there during the war, and I don't know an awful lot about him or his because he wasn't around. So I would love to do some research on his time in Canada. Yeah.
Oh, we'd be happy to meet up. And we're all across the Canada. So wherever you go, there'll be somebody from the group there,
well,
which is fantastic.
I'm hoping to retire in a few years, and then maybe I'll make a trip. That would be lovely.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And yes, please stay tuned. We have our April talk with Harold Arnkill, Color and Contemporary Art, and our May workshop, The Brand of You. So please check out our website. If you're not yet a member of the CRSC, please, you know, consider supporting us and spread the word about color across Canada, and also the role that, you know, color plays in our lives, and how the international color community is really trying to, you know, bring work like Fiona's doing across the board, across into many, many disciplines. So thank you, and yeah, happy International Color Day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.